All right, I want to do a really quick tutorial here to show you how to use waste yarn to create openings in your knitting. This is an excellent technique to use instead of binding off stitches that you're going to be working again. You could be putting a pocket into a sweater or thumb openings on mittens or heel opening on socks, or in this case, in this particular example that I'm working on here, I'm putting openings for armholes on a dog sweater. So the first thing you want to do is get a piece of waste yarn, and you want to use a contrasting color to the yarn that you're currently working in so that you can easily see it. And you're just going to knit with this yarn instead of your real yarn. So just make a little loop and loop that over your right needle and pull up a stitch, and then just slide that off your left needle. And then you're just going to continue to knit with this waste yarn. Pull off a little bit just so that you have a little bit of a tail to work with later on, and then work with the long end to knit the rest of your stitches. So just knit as many stitches as your pattern calls for. I'm working on this dog coat with the dog sweater with the leg openings, and my pattern calls for 8 stitches. So then I usually just take these just to get them out of the way. I usually just tie those into a little bit of a bow or a knot or something just to get them out of the way so that they're not dangling in your way with these. Then what you're going to do is you are going to take all of those stitches that you just knit and you're going to put them back onto your left needle. Then you're going to knit those stitches with your gray yarn. So you're just going to go into the front leg of that as if it's a regular stitch and knit it. And then I'm just going to continue to knit around. So I'll stop there and I'll just show you what we've done. And you essentially have a hole. If I was to remove this yarn, you'd have all the stitches that are on the needle, but any that are down below would just drop and you would have a run of stitches just disappearing. We all know what that's like. And then you're just going to continue to knit your pattern as you would normally. And you'll come back to this waste yarn and pull it out later on. I'll show you how to do that in the next part. But first, I actually need to knit 2 armhole openings. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to review it with you. So we're going to take that new piece of waste yarn that's in a contrasting color, slip a loop over the right-hand needle, pull up a stitch, and then slide it off the needle. And just continue to knit in this manner to create the number of stitches that you need for your opening. In my case, I need 8 stitches, so I'll just continue to knit these 8 stitches. And then I'll just tie that string off to get it out of my way. Just do a little bow there. And then I'm going to slip those stitches back onto my left needle. Okay, and then I'm going to knit those stitches with my gray yarn. And then I'll just finish the rest of the round with my regular working yarn. And that's it. I have now created 2 leg openings. So we've got one here with the white yarn, and then one over here with the black yarn. So now I'll show you how to pick up these stitches in order to work them into the pattern. In my case, I'm going to be creating a little bit of a cuff for the armholes so that the dog legs can go through it. So I've worked a little bit more down this pattern to create a little bit of a bottom edge to this coat, and I'm going to show you now how to pick up these stitches in order to work them. So in order to pick these stitches up, you want to work with a set of double-pointed needles that are slightly smaller than the needle that you've been knitting with. That'll make it easier to get into the holes. You're going to be working the point of your double-pointed needle into the right leg of the work just above your waste yarn, as you can see here in this picture. Insert your needle into each of the right legs for the amount of stitches that you have in your waist yarn. In my case, it's 8. Then you're going to do the same thing for the stitches below your waist yarn. You're going to work into the same right leg of each stitch. Again, in my case, I have 8 stitches that I've picked up. So once you've picked up all your stitches, you should see that you've got the right leg of the stitch above and below your waist yarn, and you can match that up to the V of the waist yarn stitch. So let me just show you how I do this using video. So I will start by inserting my double pointed needle into the right leg above the stitches of the waist yarn. So as you can see, I'm into the right leg here, and then I'm going to skip the left leg and then work into the next right leg and continue to do that until I've picked up all 8 stitches. So I'm going to count these. I've got 2, 4, 6, 8 stitches on my top needle. So then I'm just going to flip the work around, and then I'll do the same thing and pick up the 8 stitches on the other side of the waist yarn. So again, I'm going to work into that right leg and skip the left leg and then work into the right leg again of the next stitch below the waist yarn. So just work across, picking up each one of those right legs of each stitch. And once you've got all the stitches that you need on your double pointed needles according to your pattern, then it's time to get rid of that waist yarn. So I flip it over, and what I use is my trusty darning needle. If you don't have a darning needle that's handy, you could use one of your double pointed needles. You just want to be able to get in there between the stitches and start to pull up the end, the loose end of the yarn. So pull it up, and then just before you pull it all the way out, I like to flip it over and take a look at the other side to make sure before I pull it out that the stitch that I'm about to remove that waist yarn is indeed actually on my needle. So I'll take a quick look here, and I can see that that stitch is on the needle, so I'm safe to pull that yarn out from that stitch. And once I've removed it, I just like to double check that the stitch that I just removed the waist yarn from is indeed on my needle and not a different stitch. You'd be surprised at how often you think you got the right stitch, but you don't. Now it's time to pull it out of the stitch that's on the other needle. And you just want to make sure that you've safely got that on the needle. And then once that's off those 2 needles, you're pretty safe to just go ahead and pull that yarn out throughout the rest of your stitches that are on your needles. So I'll just pull these all out here until I get close to the end stitches, the last stitches that I've got on my needles. And then I like, again, to just work it a little bit slower. And then as I get close to those last stitches, I just like to slow down a little bit and make sure before I remove the yarn that the stitch I'm taking it out of is indeed on the double pointed needles. And I'll do the same thing for the last stitch there. Pull it through and make sure that I've caught it on the needles. So then I just like to double check to go back and count to make sure that I actually have all the stitches that I want on my needles. I should have 8 on the top, and as it turns out, I only have 7. So it looks like I've actually dropped a stitch. And if I look closely, yeah, sure enough, there it is. So it's a really good idea to just double check before you start working and start moving the stuff around that you've caught all the stitches so that you don't get a run of dropped stitches. So in the end, you can just double check that everything is on your stitches by giving a little tug and just making sure that they're all together on both sides with no drop stitches. And then you're good to go. Now we can start to pick up those stitches and knit them. So I'm going to work with a contrasting yarn here so you can see what I'm doing. Typically when I'm doing this, I will put an extra stitch in the gap area between the 2 needles. I find this works really well when I'm working pockets and when I'm working on the legs of a dog sweater. But follow your pattern. You may not need that stitch in between. But in order to add that stitch, I just use like a crochet hook, or you can just use your needle to pull up a loop and then slide that onto your bottom needle. And now I am ready to knit these. So I'm going to knit the bottom row using my third needle, and I'll just knit across these as usual. Once I finish knitting all the stitches on this bottom needle, I'm going to do the same thing and add another stitch in that gap area between the two needles. So pick up the stitch and then just knit that as usual. And then I'm going to flip it around and start doing this other end of the stitches and knit those up. And then I am ready to knit the rest of my leg opening here. So when you come across a pattern that tells you to bind off stitches that you know you're going to pick up later on, why not try it with a piece of waste yarn instead? So let me show you an example here. Here is one that I've done using this method with the waste yarn. And as you can see, it's really stretchy. I can stretch this quite a long way. Let me show you another example. On this example, I have bound off the stitches and then come back and pick them up and knit them. And you can see there's an edge there, there's a seam there, and it's not nearly as stretchy as the other example. So again, if I show you this one's super stretchy, like I can stretch it out all the way. And it also has a really nice finish to it because there's no seam. It is seamless from one side to the other, from where the original stitches are to where I picked them up and started to knit them again. Let me know if you have any questions at all. And if you want to learn more about making dog wear, why not download the 4 steps to measuring your dog so you can get started. This workbook will give you a step-by-step guide to how to measure your dog so you can get started to knit for your dog. You can find the download for this workbook below.